Hi, I'm the wrong hero. Whoops, I almost forgot my mask. And it's a good thing that I remembered to put it on because whoever sees my true face cannot live. Whoa, there's a lot of loose talk going around about conspiracy theories. And as far as I'm concerned, those are just the manifestations of the growing alienization of the American due to the commodification of the workforce. In other words, who says I'm paranoid? Who? Who? Well, all this loose talk about conspiracy theories, I'd like to discuss something that's very seldom discussed, and that is, of course, conspiracy facts. That's right, conspiracy facts, because I believe not that what you don't know can't hurt you. I believe that what you don't know can kill you. Although, I don't really want to, create an us versus them mentality, which is, again, characteristic of the schizophrenic mentality. But they're taking over. As a matter of fact, we shouldn't even put that in the present tense. They, whoever they are, have always been taking over, at least in this country. Well, for example, the American Revolution. It was fought by brave patriots who wanted to have, create an environment of freedom for everybody, free of repressive laws from overseas. In other words, an anti-colonial movement, one of the very first. Well, that's all very true, but of course, really the reason the American Revolution was fought was so that plantation owners could drink cheap tea. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, if you forgive my punning on the notion that tea can be boiled and drunk, therefore that's what it all boils down to. You know that tea they threw in the Boston Harbor during the Boston Tea Party? It's still there. So, every time you just dip a teacup in that Boston Harbor, you can taste some of that oolong. And it's been oolong since I've done that. Anyway, there's all these places that have signs on them that say, Washington slept here, Washington slept here. Well, I have a sign here in this apartment which reads, Washington would have slept here, except I was watching him every second so that he wouldn't sleep, and then I'd fall asleep and lower my guard so that that wooden-toothed, powdered wig-wearing, buckle-shoe sporting rascal could dig into my silverware drawer and sell off the silver to fund the colonial army. So Washington didn't sleep here. Washington slept here. Washington slept here. Man, no wonder they call him the father of his country, huh? Man, he must have slept everywhere. Anyway, oh yeah. But there's the thing. Washington never told a lie. Well, here's my question. How did he get laid? Huh? And they call him the father of our country. Anyway, during his farewell address to the nation, Washington warned our country about two great menaces: the rise of sectarian and divisive party politics, and foreign entanglements. He cautioned against both of these phenomena. Oh, just goes to show the great respect we hold him in that we totally disregarded every single one of his dictates just as soon as his back was turned and he was safely out of the way. He caught a cold, poor guy, but the primitive medical technology of his day, instead of dosing him with drugs and putting him into a perpetual stupor for the rest of his short existence, well, they bled him with leeches, and, well, what happens. It's sort of a metaphor for what the government's been doing to us ever since. Yes, that's right, bleeding us dry with leeches. But I'm beginning to sound a little bit like Louis Farrakhan here, so maybe I better knock it off. Anyway, things went swimmingly for a while. This country was it slowly built itself up. There were the 13 states. Let's see. Actually, there were 9 states, and New York, North Carolina, and Virginia, was it? I think so. Yeah, they held out. And they finally got what they wanted. And then tiny Rhode Island was the 13th state. And if it weren't for Rhode Island, we wouldn't have senators, 2 from each state. You see, they're the ones that went dickering for that. Now, Delaware knew what side of the bread its bread was buttered on. It was the first state. And Pennsylvania joined it very soon thereafter. But tiny Rhode Island held out, and Vermont didn't even join the Union at all. Well, they were an independent country for 11 years. They even minted their own currency. And it was based on the decimal system, as a matter of fact. But you're not really interested in any of this. This is all very dry, ponderous history. And of course, as Henry Ford, that great man, said, history is bunk. Of course, he said a great many other things too. for example, that there was a certain amount of veracity in the protocols of the elders of Zion, and things like that. And he built this little village, um, that was supposed to like be a memento mori of the way things used to be. That is, the way things used to be until Ford came around and brought mass production to the American marketplace and mass-produced cars, which of course totally uprooted the landscape and made everything into one long highway. Actually, it was Eisenhower who built our system of roadways, and he didn't build it because he wanted to give Americans greater mobility. He built it so that tanks could roll down the highways in the event of an overseas attack. Anyway, we're going to skip all the way up to the 1830s. I mean, basically, not an awful lot happened during the 1800s. And the 1810s were the era of good feeling, and in the 1820s there was all this stuff about John Quincy Adams and Andy Jackson. Now, here's where things get interesting. Andy Jackson, he was the first president who wasn't either from Virginia or a descendant of the John Adams family. And that was very interesting, basically because you could tell by his supporters that he wasn't exactly a lifted pinky sort of fellow, if you know what I mean. But strangely enough, yes, Jackson was an orphan. Very interesting, you see. But in the 1830s, there arose this sort of populism. The Democratic Party basically was an Andrew Jackson type of phenomena. And the populism which arose during the administration of Andrew Jackson and to a lesser extent during the administrations of Martin Van Buren and James Polk were basically populism, but a certain type of populism which was basically just a disguise for pandering to the basest instincts of King Mob. Now, I've met King Mob. Big, fat, unshaven, swaggering, perpetually drunk, but basically a nice guy as long as you don't get on his wrong side. But of course I'm the wrong hero, and I always get on everybody's wrong side. Anyway, during the 1840s, not an awful lot happened. We stole half of Mexico from Mexico. We got a lot of stuff in that sweet little deal. Parts of Wyoming, Colorado, the whole of New Mexico, big chunk of California, except we didn't manage to keep Baja California, for which I suppose the Mexicans are grateful, and of course that big old chunk of Texas. And a lot of people complain about the Mexicans coming to California and not speaking English, but it was their country at one time. The fact that we paid Mexico $15 million, we bought it, right? Thank God we take nothing by conquest, but what they don't mention is that we took about $200 million worth of gold out of California during the gold rush, you see. So, I mean, it's like saying, here, give me $2, I'll give you 15 cents. Not really a very fair trade. And the Gadsden Purchase. Nobody ever talks about the Gadsden Purchase anymore. Basically, we bought this little chunk of desert wasteland so we could run a railroad through there. With the way Amtrak's going now, they probably don't even run trains through there regularly. What a waste. What a jip. I'll tell you, we really got burned on the Gadsden Purchase. I mean, the Louisiana Purchase, 4 cents an acre. Alaska, 2 cents an acre. The Gadsden Purchase, useless. Nothing good for nothing but loco weed and tumbleweeds and deserts and, it's sort of like America's Siberia or something. Anyway, here's an interesting fact. Did you know that up to about the 1960s or so, 1970s, virtually every American was a Mason, except John F. Kennedy and Henry Kissinger, of course. Now, here's where we get to the interesting part. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go in a minute, but I'll be right back. Slavery. This whole thing about slavery. We fought the Civil War basically because the industrial North wanted to throw its weight around, and the South wasn't having any of that, and they were all big for states' rights. They were the anti-federalists basically, and the North was the federalists, and the two don't really coincide with the Republican and Democratic parties per se. I mean, the Federalists were really big into big government, and you know, that's a sort of democratic thing. Of course, they were also into central money management and rule by the rich, which of course is a big Republican thing. And the Anti-Federalists were for states' rights. They were also for individual freedom. So again, you know, states' rights, that's sort of the big Republican thing now, but individual freedom, well, it's always been a democratic sort of thing. So anyway, eventually, by the time the Civil War rolled around, we had our present party system of Democrats and Republicans. And, well, back then, Republicans were a little different. You know, they believed in equal rights and stuff like that. Boy, a far cry, huh? Well, anyway, the Civil War was fought basically so that Northerners could have cheap cotton without paying through the nose. And you know, they were jealous of the slaves. They had wage slaves, but that just wasn't quite the same thing. Wage slaves have an inconvenient habit of striking for better conditions and wanting to own property and things like that. Whereas, you know, ordinary slaves said, forget it. I mean, yeah, they're slaves, damn it, they're slaves, all right? So anyway, we managed to get rid of slavery. Of course, it was promptly replaced by sharecropping, good old sharecropping, and which was sort of like wage slavery, only you never really ever got out of debt when you were a sharecropper. Sort of like having credit cards today, if you want to look at it from a modern perspective. And oh yeah, and sharecropping eventually was replaced by lynching, and then that was replaced by the prison industrial complex, which of course we have today. You know, we have over 1 million prisoners in this country, which is like the highest of any industrialized country except Russia. Of course, even people who aren't in prison in Russia probably kind of wish they were. But we have over 1 million prisoners. It's a real milestone in our history. And some fools insist that there's no such thing as progress. Now, I have something which is going to be well worth waiting for. You know, ordinarily I would turn the camera off, but I'm kind of pressed for time. And this camera is like on its last legs, and it took me quite a while to fire it up again. So I'm just going to leave it running for a second while I go get this thing. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. Oh, get a load of this. Samuel Adams, right? He was like an American patriot and, of course, a brewer. You know, it's just one of those myths of American history that Samuel Adams was a prominent brewer. He made shitty beer, man. He made shitty beer. And anybody will tell you this who was there. Of course, they're all dead now, so I'm pretty safe in saying this. But anyway, I have something here. It's a letter that was written to Abraham Lincoln right after the time of the Emancipation Proclamation. And if I had some poignant music, you know, anyway, listen, Abe, and you know, you think that Bill Clinton has a hard time of it, but Abraham Lincoln was subjected to a veritable onslaught of negative commentary about his personal life, his wife, his presidency. And here's just an example. Listen, Abe, you stovepipe hat-wearing, 40 acres and a mule promising archetypal Republican, we know all about you and your cunning stunts. How you walked 5 miles to return 3 cents and you couldn't afford chalk, so you did your ciphering on a slate with a piece of coal. How you split rails and cracked jokes while the country was torn in two by a civil war. And the Confederate flag was flying in Alexandria, Virginia, in sight of the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C. Sure, you freed the slaves, but you took your good old time about it, didn't you? And what do they remember you for today? A children's toy called Lincoln Logs, and people use your head on a penny to check for tread wear on tires. You Lincoln, you teetotaling General Grant promoting Andrew Johnson defending Hick, your history. Now, that remark that Lincoln made about General Grant's a drunk, but I wish he would send some of my other generals some of the same brand of whiskey that he apparently enjoys so much. Well, that's an apocryphal story. But he did say in defense of Andrew Johnson, Andy ain't no drunk. Typical of the eloquent oratory of Mr. Lincoln. Anyway, we're going to skip up to the 1890s now. The victory of the North, the triumph of its hegemony, and J.P. Morgan sort of supplying the country with gold during the Depression and taking the money in government bonds and selling them off at a brisk profit. And, that pretty much squashed Cleveland pretty good, Anyway, the victory of the North and its industrial ethos leads to an oligopoly with benevolent Donald Trumps of their day, like Andrew Carnegie, who exploited steel workers, made them work in miserable conditions, to say nothing of the coal miners who supplied the coal to make the steel. The guy who went off to Scotland and left his Confederate Frick to bust a strike on a slender pretext and shoot all these miners. And of course, he was shot himself by Alexander Berkman, who was the lover of Emma Goldman, a prominent anarchist of her day. Andrew Carnegie, he makes all this money. He slides this little piece of paper that says something like $496 million for U.S. Steel, although it wasn't called U.S. Steel back then. And then he builds all these libraries with the money he accumulates, and everybody thinks he's a great philanthropist. That's a pretty neat trick. Rockefeller, he makes all his money from oil. He gets a corner on the oil market, and then to assuage his conscience on behalf, on the advice of his public relations people, he hands out dimes to little children. Like that makes up for it. And he was, his distant ancestor was, descendant, I should say, was vice president for a little while, which is something we conveniently forget. And then there's Frick, and, I already mentioned him, and Mellon, and his name was on a prominent bank here, and Vanderbilt, and, he was just a robber baron, and yet his name is like, lifted pinky, teacup sipping, white glove wearing, high society. Jay Gould, who invented watered stock, which, they used to give cattle water to fatten them up before they were weighed, and then, of course, they piss it all away, and the guy who bought the cattle that was watered would be gypped. And George Washington Plunkett, who gave us a very valuable political insight. He distinguished between honest graft and the dishonest kind. Honest graft is, say, for example, you hear that some park is going up for sale well in advance of any other investors, and it's going to be made into something or other, like some high-rise is going to go up there. And so you buy the park, and then you make a brisk profit. And he said, that's honest graft. I saw my opportunities, and I took them. Now, also during the 1890s, it was the closing of the frontier. And, we didn't have myths per se. We had the founding fathers, George Washington throwing a silver dollar across the Rappahannock and, getting his knees all smudged up and while he was praying at Valley Forge. Neither of which happened, of course. But, the opening up of the West and the cowboy myth. Cowboys were just drunks of the Old West, drunk, illiterate, and homicidal maniacs, and yet we mythologize them. It's like the modern day Iliad for us. And we opened up the West, we finished off the Indians. The right to bear arms basically led to this kind of frontier mentality, which in turn led to Indian genocide. So all of you Second Amendment people, just keep this in mind, okay? Guns mean repression, no matter who has them. And a lot of these paramilitary people, they were in the Army. They should know better than anybody else where this sort of behavior leads to, governmental repression and all that. And yet, they use their military training to say that, well, we're going to resist the government repression. In fact, it was the government that trained them in the use of guns. And I don't know, I just can't figure it out. They're taking over. That's what I'm getting at. And these are conspiracy facts, people. These aren't theories. These things actually happened. And the Old West, the rise of the Old West, it basically benefited the ranchers who put up barbed wire everywhere, even though the land didn't really belong to them. Tried doing that at Trump Plaza there, Put up some barbed wire around there. Well, this here land's mine. I don't own the deed to it or anything, but by right of this here barbed wire, I own this here piece of property. Get your hands off of my property. Well, and the farmers got the shaft, basically. And, the thing about the farmers, nowadays, it's not right to pick on farmers. I mean, back then they were senile coots shackled to rusted tractors off in the American Rust Belt. And the farmers were actually a conspiracy because they controlled the nation's food supply. And there was a good case to be made to kill farmers because they control the nation's food supply. But now, of course, it's all big agribiz, sucking up the water tables in California and anywhere else they can get their hands on the water tables, just to grow some grapes that are like harvested by people from across the border and all this stuff. Well, anyway, there was the progressive era. That didn't last long. Along came World War I. Goodbye civil liberties. And then the 1920s, where the need for disciplined workers led to intellectual industrialization by means of compulsory schooling, which turned out better slaves for industry, basically, and media-based bread and circuses, and fear-based advertising. It's been said that a man would rather carry a red flag in a parade than wear a red tie to the office. Now, I could get into this, but I'm kind of short on time here, unfortunately. But what happened was the rise of big advertising pitted the mother and her children against the father. The father went out and made the money that enabled the mother to buy the commodities which enabled the family to live up to the expectations of other families, and that sort of encouraged them to pour scorn upon the poor, hard-working father who was too busy being a wage slave to keep up with the latest fashions, but it was through dint of his hard work that he made enough money to buy the commodities that enabled the family to keep up with fashions, which in turn encouraged them to scorn the hard-working dad. In other words, dad goes out and gets the heart attacks, and everybody else gets to stay home and eat ice cream and wear little Lord Fauntleroy suits and Buster Brown shoes. Well, in the 1930s, there was the Great Depression, and in spite of the fact that they tinkered with the Federal Reserves and kept lowering and lowering the interest rates, nothing happened. Right up until 1938, 39, things were the same as during 1930 as far as the economy was concerned. Unemployment was still very high, and lowering interest rates doesn't really encourage anything. And of course, slashing capital gains, forget it. All it does is make rich people richer, and the money comes out of the pockets of the poor. Well, slash those capital gains enough, and maybe the poor and the middle class will team up against people who have a lot of money. But don't wait for it. Don't hold your breath on that one. Because, the rise of motion pictures and commercial radio, indirectly at least, led to this vast governmental law enforcement bureaucracy. And the way it did that was it created commodity fetishism. And, when commodities become this great object, property and whatnot, commodities, then you need a gigantic law enforcement bureaucracy to keep people from violating the rights of property and commodities. In other words, you need more cops to keep thieves from stealing what is rightfully yours. And the whole idea of a radical lawyer is kind of an oxymoron, because the entire judicial system in the United States is founded on property rights, something which the Second Amendment nuts don't talk about very much. You'll never take my gun away from me. You'll have to pry it from my cold, dead fingers. What are guns but the ultimate commodity? They protect commodities, and they're also an enabling device to enable you to steal commodities from the people who are trying to protect them. It's sort of upping the ante, so to speak. The great equalizer. Well, World War II led to a permanent wartime footing, which led to that friendly old military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower so eloquently warned us about during his farewell address to the nation. Of course, again, nobody listened. So, like from 1941 to 1973, we were on this permanent wartime footing. And guess what? Our currency was devalued against world currencies in 1973. The dollar went straight down the crapper in 1973. The oil shock commenced in 1973. Our constant rate of growth slowed in 1973. Everything happened in 1973. Big, pivotal year. And who was running things then? Nixon, in the wake of Watergate. Actually, some people say Kissinger was running things, but, well, we'll have to ask Henry about that. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to take the credit. and evade the blame. Anyway, commercial television in the 1950s enables strategically placed dream makers to further control the content of our aspirations. For example, Walt Disney. Good old Walt Disney. He sort of takes all these myths, debases them, commodifies them, mass markets them, and voila, we're controlled by Disney. Our mass neuroses are created by the very man who is credited for being our dream maker. They're also abetted, of course, by fast food like McDonald's and spurious over-the-counter medications and the mass advertising of same. For example, aspirin ads which give you a headache, laxatives which make you dependent upon laxatives. Anyway, in the 1960s, it started out as a speedy decade, and then it became a mild euphoric hallucinogenic decade, and then of course it became a depressed decade towards the end. And dissidence was absorbed and commodified. The speed causes the dissidence, and the sort of hallucinogenic affect enables it to be absorbed, and then of course the depressed affect enables it to be commodified. And during the 60s we saw the mass Stalinization of commodities. Now Stalinization is a concept in which can be best explained by the fact that during the regime of Joe Stalin in Soviet Russia, his poster was everywhere. Well, Stalinization of commodities means that posters for commodities are everywhere. Now, in the 1970s, hedonism was offered up as an attractive alternative to political activism. And in the 1980s, conservatism was regnant. As John Mitchell so presciently observed, the Attorney General of the United States during the Nixon administration, this country's going to swing so far to the right, you won't even recognize it. And boy, was he right. He wasn't right about a lot of things, but he was right about that. Anyway, during the 1980s, of course, came the rise of the computer industrial complex, and of course, talk radio and tabloid television, more bread and circuses for the United States. In other words, it's sort of like a freak show. A mass-marketed freak show. Now, in the 1990s came bioengineering, which of course could have very disastrous consequences, and the neglect of the environment, which will definitely have disastrous consequences. And all of these things poised us on the brink of a new era, where the rich-poor divide widens, the world economy influences our affairs more and more, and authoritarianism takes on the trappings of democratic capitalism, and democratic capitalism in turn takes on many of the trappings of authoritarianism. Now in 1994, to bring us up to speed, came the triumph of the school bully. That's right, the legislature goes Republican, and we return to the grand old principles of Barry Goldwater and George Wallace. And nowadays, even the Democratic Party is leaving the Democratic Party. So things are ripe for a big change, but who knows who is going to affect it or whether it will be affected at all. Well, I'd like to thank my advertisers, who include Conditioned Response Coffee, part of the fine line of operant conditioning products. Smell that coffee. It's enough to wake you up, isn't it? Well, it's Conditioned Response Coffee. Look for the bell and the picture of the salivating dog on every can. And remember, Pavlov likes it too. The Wrong Heroes presentation of Conspiracy Fact was also brought to you by Coke Light. What's the matter, dear? Only half a line? Oh, cocaine makes me nervous. Doctor says if I don't stop snorting cocaine, they're going to have to take my nose off and sew a button on. Why, haven't you heard of Coke Light? Coke Light? Coke Light? 1 week later, gee, honey, we all miss that funny little whistle when you breathe. Thanks to you and to Coke Light. Coke Light. Everything you always wanted in a cocaine. And you can snort it by the fistful. The Wrong Hero is also brought to you by the Arbitron Network, bringing you these fine shows. The Mandarin Hour, in which high-born academicians tell you your business. The Old Lifer program, in which bitter, frustrated old men tell you where to get off. And The talent show, where people without resumes but with an insatiable ability to climb their way to the top urge you to emulate them. And of course, by our fine line of programs, including Happy Talk and the 5, 6, 10, and 11 o'clock news, featuring the Weather God, Sports Wrap-Up with your host, Bob Cheerleader, and the Arbitron Network also brings you a new innovation in programming. 25,000 commercials. Why watch boring old television shows when the commercials are the best thing about them? Watch the only show which is dedicated to running commercials 24 hours a day. Yes, it's 25,000 commercials. The Wrong Hero's Conspiracy Fact has also been brought to you by McWrongo's, fast food chain of restaurants in which the customer is always wrong. At McWrongo's, you'll see scenes like this. I need a large fries. Well, what about addressing what I need? Dignified, meaningful work at a middle-class wage with guaranteed health benefits. Another thing you'll see at McWrongo's is, give me a double burger. I don't want it. Them things will kill you. Yet another scenario that you'll see at McWrongo's, the fast food restaurant, where the customer is always wrong, is the following. Give me 10 pies, 10 shakes, and 10 cheeseburgers. For here to go. To go? Okay, that'll be about 20 minutes. Sit down, have a beer. I hope you don't mind Pabst. It's from my private stash. Can I have change for $1? You will never affect true change in our country. For a mere dollar, it will take billions and billions of dollars to change the societal and political structures of this country. The Wrong Hero is also brought to you by Capitalism for Dummies. This egg is your brain. This egg is your brain on capitalism. And comrades, the yoke is on you. Anyway, I hope you liked my show. If not, I'm carrying $20,000 in small bills, a fake beard, and a passport. And by the way, ask Judge Ito if I can have my glove back. Anyway, I'm the Wrong Hero, and this has been Conspiracy Fact. Hi, I'm the Wrong Hero. Here to welcome you to part 2 of Conspiracy Fact. Let's see, well, the first thing I'd like to say, excuse me please, is that I'm the Wrong Hero, and men call me the avatar of the moron zeitgeist. Let me make sure I have these levels all right here. Yes, so. Am I in the picture? Is there even a picture? Well, anyway. It's my belief that big business is the religion of selfishness, and that commodities are our household gods. And that advertising, as George Orwell so eloquently put it, is not only the rattling of a stick in a swill bucket, but it is also the Stalinization of commodities. In other words, ads, like posters of Stalin during his regime in Soviet Russia, are everywhere. Now, if we live to be 80, we will have seen 20 million commercials. Now, this sort of puts Farrakhan's Million Man March in its proper perspective. Television and advertising has a tendency to tell us things we'd rather not know, like the ingredients of hot dogs or the sexual orientation of Dom DeLuise. Now, next on Ricky Lake, a society of the spectacle which scorns informed political discourse. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, Wrong Hero, what are your political beliefs? I was hoping to save this controversial segment for a later show. However, I think I'll let you in on what my political beliefs are. My platform is to enthrone tyrants and doom freedom, which isn't so very different than the United States' foreign policy in Latin America for the last 50 years, or 100 years actually. So I don't think there's too much controversy about that. However, I also favor gun control except for assault weapons and armor-piercing bullets, which I think should be legal. School prayer, I think it should be compulsory, and I also believe that there should be a moment of noise in Bible schools. Now, I support all affirmative action quotas, but only when they favor me. I oppose the death penalty, except for people I just plain don't like. And I support only gays in the military. I think there should be a capital gains tax increase, and I support a totally unbalanced budget and abortion wrongs. Now, some have called the Democrats the party of tax and spend, and some have called the Republicans the party of capital gains. Actually, I'm being facetious here. It is I who refer to the two political parties by these nicknames, endearing ones, which I cooked up for this very show. And I hope you appreciate all my hard work. Well, now, what I'm about to say may prove to be even more controversial than the statements of the previous 35 minutes or so. However, I am the Wrong Hero, and it is incumbent upon me to give you these unpleasant truths. Basically, one can equate each presidential regime with a particular licit or illicit drug. For example, Eisenhower was tranquilizers, Kennedy was amphetamines, Lyndon Baines Johnson was LSD, Richard Nixon was heroin, Gerald Ford was Quaaludes. Now Jimmy Carter, it's kind of a toss-up, but I guess I'd have to say Jimmy Carter was marijuana. And Ronald Reagan was certainly cocaine. And George Bush was almost without a doubt crack cocaine. Now, Bill Clinton, the jury's still out, and I've taken an informal survey of some of my acquaintances. One of them said he was chewing tobacco. That doesn't seem quite right somehow. Another said he was Prozac. And again, it sounds good, but I'm not quite sure it'll hold up in the wash. My theory is that Bill Clinton is actually Ritalin, or Ritalin, or whatever you want to call it. In other words, it's an amphetamine that is given to school children who are hyperactive to calm them down. But it has become a drug of abuse among trendy college students who take it in its tablet form and grind it up and snort it up their noses. You know, college students have a very childish tendency to put strange things up their noses. I've seen some of them actually take no-dos and grind them up and put it in their noses, and I don't know. It just doesn't seem right somehow. But anyhow, perhaps I've spoken enough. I am the Wrong Hero. This is, or has been, Conspiracy Fact. And I suppose I've said just about all I have to say, except, wait a minute. What are some other great American conspiracies? Well,
you know, the thing about the outer space aliens landing here in the United States and the Pentagon's covering it up. And, well, it doesn't seem to hold water to me. I mean, I think it's actually swamp gas or observation balloons that the Weather Service puts up. I don't believe there are any aliens who would be so technologically advanced that they wouldn't be able to monitor our every coming and going without actually having to set foot on this horrible rock. I mean, really, what's in it for them? Oh, there's the phone. I'll be right back. Ah, yes, that was the Pentagon, and they warned me to stop saying these things because they have a vested interest in seeing to it that there is a menace sufficiently powerful enough to make people want to utilize their services. However, I am the wrong hero, and I will not equivocate. I will not prevaricate, and I will be heard. Anyway, if these aliens are so smart, right, why do they even have to crash land their flying saucers here? And why is it that whenever aliens crash land their flying saucers, they always crash land them smack dab in the middle of the one place where all of the most credulous and slack-jawed rubes and hicks happen to congregate? You never see them crash landing in the middle of Times Square or during New Year's Eve or at a mass can rally, for example, although I guess they probably wouldn't be noticed there. No, it's always in the middle of some desert, and I think maybe it's because they're attracted to silicon because they're probably not carbon-based life forms. They're probably silicon-based life forms, and sand is silica after all. But and that's why they like deserts so much. But following that rather specious reasoning, if they're going to crash land on Earth, why don't they just crash land in the middle of nudie bars where there's silicon galore for their edification? And, you know, instead of saying, take me to your leader, as they're so stereotypically thought to say, why wouldn't they say something like, take me to your nudie bars, I want to see your beautifully and artificially enhanced Earth women? Well, I don't know. It's a tough call, that's for sure. Well, Watergate, yes, Watergate. I forgot to mention Watergate. Oh, and also, let's see, I made a factual error. I said that Andrew Carnegie had something to do with um, mines, coal mines and such in the United States during its great period of expansion, when in fact that is not the case. It was J.P. Morgan who, in fact, controlled the mines. So, the egg is on my face, and, well, even Homer stumbles, okay? Watergate. I think that the left-wing media was actually out to crucify Richard Nixon, and that would be a very plausible theory, except for one thing. The media is not, nor has it ever been left-wing. In fact, there's only 3 or 4 papers in the entire country that could be even properly identified as left of center, let alone liberal. And I think those would probably be, maybe the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Washington Post. And you know, how many other papers are there? 1,700, 1,900? I mean, that's a pretty small percentage of so-called left liberal papers. Even if you triple it or quadruple it, that still amounts to less than 1%. Notice my lightning mathematical mind in action. So, actually, I think what it was that Nixon secretly wanted to be caught for Watergate, and because he figured that the strains of the presidency were too much, and he didn't really want to finish out his second term. So, you know, he had these burglars stumble in there and do their thing, and that's how Watergate happened. You see, it was Nixon sabotaging himself because he was his own worst enemy. We know that he was down in the Congressional Press Office printing up flyers that said, impeach Nixon, impeach Nixon. and putting up all over all over the Capitol, late at night, after talking to anti-war protesters at the Lincoln Memorial, he'd sneak around putting up these posters, impeach Nixon, impeach Nixon. Well, finally, of course, he was caught and impeached. Well, actually, no. He quit before he could be impeached, you see, which is even better in a way, because then that left him no chance of ever getting back into the office, which obviously weighed so heavily upon him. And this seems like the most plausible Watergate theory of all, yet I've never heard anybody expound it. How odd. Now, this thing about John F. Kennedy being assassinated, well, I have to confess, the person solely responsible for it wasn't the mafia, it wasn't Castro, it wasn't the communists, nor was it outer space aliens, nor was it Elvis. Lyndon Johnson had nothing to do with it. For the first time anywhere, this is a world exclusive, the identity of the Kennedy assassin, it was me, the wrong hero. But I was only 6 years old at the time, and Oswald did have something to do with it. He had to help me aim. That bold action on the Marcino Carciano, kind of difficult for a 6-year-old. So he propped me up on some phone books and said, "Okay, there he is. Now just squeeze the trigger." Unfortunately, I was a little trigger happy, and I pumped it 3 times, and well, you know the rest of the sad story. It's a wonder they never caught me. I was in that same movie theater. They never tell you what the movie was. I'll tell you what it was. It was Cleopatra, and everybody else was asleep, and that's how they caught Oswald. Anyway, perhaps I've said enough. Perhaps I've said too much. I am desperately trying to think of other conspiracies that have occupied the minds of America, but I don't know. Oh yeah, Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra was kind of screwy. There we had the Challenger that blew up in the middle of the air, and we had all those perfectly good weapons that we were giving to our sworn foes, Iran. I think we should have kept those weapons and given the Challenger to Iran. It would have made a lot more sense. But there was one good thing that came out of Iran-Contra, the Army recruiting ad. Be a hostage and see the world, or at least a very small part of it. Oh, and maybe perhaps some of you remember the novelty frozen confection that came out during the Iran-Contra hearings. They were called farcicles. You take one bite of them and they blow up in your face. So anyway, famous conspiracies. I can't think of any others, really. But the Trilateral Commission, the Black Helicopters, Ruby Ridge and Waco, which were kind of like the gun lovers' Altamont, if you get my drift. And the conspiracy theorists have it all wrong. The only real conspiracy that exists in the United States today is, in fact, the conspiracy theorists who spend all of their time, getting together and trying to prove that conspiracies exist. They're the real conspiracy, but they don't realize it. When I talk about conspiracy theorists, I talk about the kind of people who put down in their library cards, occupation, proving Oswald was a patsy. Those kind of conspiracy theorists. Those are the kind I mean. Uh-oh, what's going on? They don't talk very much about the real conspiracies, you see. And that's why this presentation has been called Conspiracy Fact. Now, if you would like a transcript and summary of the Wrong Hero's Conspiracy Fact, then you're out of luck, because I don't intend to prepare one, and if I did, it would be on sale at a price you probably could not afford. So, it's really a shame. I'd like to help you out, but I'm afraid that is not possible. So, anyway, I'm the Wrong Hero, and yeah, I'm tired. Down, girl, down. I guess I've said all I need to say.
follow up here. And while they're setting up, just so there's no dead air, try to tickle your organs in the brief time that I go. Hey, I live over Hi-Fi Pizza next door. How many of you have ever been to Central Square before? Well, okay. Then you know. Then you know what I'm talking about. You know that the reason why the CVS has T-O-R-E on it is because the junkies stole all the drugs. Well, you know, my apartment came furnished, which was great because I wouldn't want to go out and have to buy cockroaches. You ask if they're big. Yes, they're big. They drink diet soda. They're yuppifying my place. They don't refer to the garbage as garbage. They call it designer filth. And there's a little spare room. They have a sign over the top that says, "Welcome to Bourbon Court. Pit roast and silverfish. Please use the servant's entrance." You know, cockroaches aren't all bad. I saw a nice cockroach once. She was bringing a paper bag with a grease spot to a sick, weevil friend. We had a fellow here talking about how he was drinking too much and he decided to quit. Well, as for me, I believe in drinking too much, so I had to join Catholics Anonymous. I came to work with communion water in my bread. I took 2-hour prayer breaks. So I joined Catholics Anonymous and took the 10-point pledge. We don't believe in the power of a supreme being to order our lives. And then I had to join Satanists Anonymous after I got out of Catholicism. Yeah, Wicca Anonymous. That's right. We don't believe in the power of imploring the devil to cause universal chaos. Well, that was mighty quick, fellas. Oh, thanks, sir. Hey, thanks, guys. Hey, thanks. Except I took my notes, so I don't know what the hell I'm doing. You might wonder why I'm even up here. I'll tell you why. Because of my own worst enemy. Everybody else has a MasterCard. I have a slave card. Other people get the discovery card. I got the karma card. It's really changed you out. Well, here's the man that's going to really pay you back for all your waiting and patience and whatnot. In the meantime, I guess we'll talk about tennis shoes. How many people actually play tennis in these things? Why do they call them tennis shoes? Don't you think a more appropriate name would be something like, I don't know, flea collar? Yeah, never go out shoplifting unless you're wearing tennis sneakers, really. You wear these 10-pound boots and they'll have you either slam or quicker and you can say Frankenstein's monster. Now, there's a funny little anecdote, even an amusing one. When I was in 7th grade, I lived in this place called Northview Heights. It was a housing project. It was largely black. The black girls, they were 10 years old. They were very satiric. Well, one time I went down to the north side of Pittsburgh and I haggled with this merchant for about 20 minutes and got a pair of yellow boots for $8 instead of the $12 that he was asking, saying to him, "You can have $8 off for one home." Of course, he wasn't fooled. He would have given them to me for $6, no doubt. Well, anyway, they used to refer to them as Frankenstein orthopedics. Hey, you know, who says ghetto people are illiterate? Really? Orthopedic, that's a word I didn't even know until I was getting along in years. I want to talk a little bit about myth. I think part of the reason that we modern people have so little vitality is that our myths are so lackluster. I mean,
back in those ancient days, while there were giants in those days, they wore size 15 shoes. They had Thor, they had Zeus, and you know, I sort of pine for these gods and heroes today, even though they probably didn't believe in personal hygiene and weren't particularly attractive to stay in a room with. But what do we have nowadays? I ask you, Motley Crue, the Dodgers, Rainbow Bright, and the California Raisins. There's our God, there's our God. Ivan Boesky and Donald Trump when I was at a board game. You either play to win or you don't play at all. Boy, isn't that wonderful? Donald Trump. Just what we need, you know? Yeah, it sort of brings to mind the difference between a liberal and a libertarian. A libertarian is just a mean-minded liberal. And for that matter, what is a conservative but a socialist who wants all the money for himself? You know, so I mean, there's your political science for you wrapped up in a nice tight little ball. Well, the California Raisins, I feel like something really nasty. Heard through the grapevine, introducing the singing jars of peace. Heard through the grapevine, hang up a poster in my bathroom. Johnny, go boo-boo, your little friends might come out and play. Yeah, well, I fed dog food to my parrot, and now he's a burglar alarm. I want to talk about John Lennon's parrot. I read in one of these sleazy tabloids that someone's planning to put out an album of John Lennon's parrot singing all of John Lennon's greatest hits. You know, of course, the parrot probably gave him the ideas for all the songs. You know, like, shut up, shut up, shut up, just shut up. Shut up. I need somebody. He's a real woman. Just shut up. Get back the way you once belonged. You know. Baby, you're a rich man. I am not. Baby, you're a rich man. I am not. Baby, you're a rich man too. Of course, we know where he got the inspiration for Revolution. I know it's rough and you're working. Thank you. Yeah, I'm working the room. This is called working the room. You know, warming him up. It really looks to me as though it's a fat idiot making an ass of himself. Well, okay, so we know where John Lennon got the idea for Revolution 9. Number 9. Look me on, young man. And of course, we forget. Paul McCartney was visiting that day. Well, if it weren't for the Beatles, we probably wouldn't have a great many things. You know how they always say, if it weren't for the astronauts, we wouldn't have a tag. Oh my God! We wouldn't have a tag? How would we get along? Well, if it weren't for the Beatles, we probably wouldn't have Indian restaurants. Yeah, you know. Now, you ever go to an Indian restaurant? Anybody here favorite Indian cuisine? Well, I've been to several. Here is what invariably happens. They look at you like, this man must be insane. Why does he want to eat this food and pay for it? No, we have to eat it. You know, then they sit you down, you know. Oh, what would you like? Would you like the spicy? Or the extra spicy? Or the put you in the hospital? Whatever you got, I don't care. What's this, tandoori chicken? Oh, yes, that's chicken baked in our own brick ovens. I thought that Indians didn't eat animals. Oh, we don't eat it. But you do. That's why we said it. And so you order the extra hot stuff, and you're such sadists, too, because the water is undrinkable. You have to order beer. Oh, no, we don't want to beer. And so you have to go next door to the bar. Private business, you know. You roast your tongue. Oh, yes, we have roast tongue with you, and you're it. That's not very funny, is it? Well, okay, from Indians to Indians, you know, I want to make up for all the years that television has been glorifying cowboys and ignoring American Indians. So I wanted to write a TV pilot called And Indians. You know, I submitted this, but, you know, they turned it down because, you know, the plots were kind of enormous. They all centered around broken treaties and genocide. The bulletproof throw people here? They make yourself bulletproof and the like.
Boy, I just love this track. That's Muhammad, by the way. Um, he's a sort of the handyman around here. I guess. I don't know. Actually, I think he secretly controls the whole thing. He's seated up in his citadel, pressing buttons, you know. We were mere puppets in comparison. And why, here's Jeffrey Gagnon. Jeffrey Gagnon. And not a moment too soon. So anyway, I submitted a show called And Indians to the TV station, but they didn't go for it. They changed the title to Aborigines Someone. Yeah, and so, I don't know, I had too much principle of them mutilate my masterpiece, so I demanded an extra $1,000 a week. Should I skip all the other stuff? I'd like to talk about the 6 levels of group discussion. Here's Jeffrey and his little gang. The six levels of group interaction. I learned this in development and motivation when I was in group psychology. Where else? Levels of self, levels of other, levels of group, levels of situation, levels of society, and levels of fantasy. And here's levels of self. I'm the greatest. Here's levels of other. Don't you think so? Here's levels of group. I bet you all think so, don't you? Here's levels of situation. Boy, I'm really wild, ain't I? And here's levels of society. Everybody loves me. And here's levels of fantasy. Nobody is funnier than me. Okay? Wouldn't it be a drag to be married to a poet because he would speak in metaphors all the time? You know? He would say stuff like, "Oh, look, honey, your eyes are nothing like the sun." Or, for that matter, it would be even worse to be married to a critic because he would criticize everything. How did you like the dinner? Well, the eggplant was rather undercooked. A good eggplant, but not up to par with the kind of eggplant which you may procure at the finer restaurants in the North End. Well, you know, there's this prevalent myth, getting back to myths only briefly, that cats are stupid. And you know, one time I had a cat in my lap, and I said to her, "Boy, you're stupid." And he looked at me and says, "Hey, I'm not the one who works for a living." Yeah. Don't ever go out with a woman who has a pet cat. Because you'll be in there in the bedroom, you know, doing what you do with your girlfriend in the bedroom. I won't even mention it because this is a family audience, I think. Well, we're all families. And the cat will use your ass as a scratching post. It will. It's jealous. You know, she's paying attention to him. What's wrong with me? What did I do? Get out of here, baby face little bastard! Why can't you? Don't you dare! You know. Well, I'm glad to see that you Rotarians can make it to our 2nd annual convention. And I suppose I would bring up our first guest, which is Mr. Michael Murphy. No, that's someone famous. But there's someone soon to be almost as famous as Michael Murphy if we give him a chance. And there's a famous Bart Caruso. Not Bart Caruso, because Caruso didn't write poetry, but this is Bart Caruso. I wonder if he's going to be here for the show. Your last name is? Murray. Oh, so close yet so far. Michael Murray. Well, Michael too. I'm getting the hell out of here. Good? Keep talking. Yeah, okay, I will. I read a book when I was about 12. I haven't read one since. But it's called Ordeal of the Animals. And gee, I wish I had that book with me now. It would comfort me in my time for this. And the other book was called Fetishism. One of them was about how people torture animals, the other one was about how people pamper animals. I could never really get over the contradiction. When you're 12 years old, you don't like contradiction. Columbus discovered America. No, Lee Harrison discovered America. Martin Luther King was a saint. No, J. Edgar Hoover said he was a communist. All these contradictions. You never get over them. But here's a man who knows what he wants, and he's aiming to get it any way he can. Mr. Michael Murray. Whatever kind of a hand you can muster for this hard work. sort of sensitive nature of this songwriting process. While I'm writing, I'm kind of stay so used to it, and we're mighty pleased to have him. Steve Wilson. I was about ready again for Steve. For shooting over there. Hey, I don't like my cafe like that too. Yeah, he would just tell me, hey, go on stage, fucking set up. You're not funny. Every day. Every night. Never fails. But that's funny. That's funny. Now here's another guy who'll just charm you right down to your toes. Yes, sir. I'll tell you, never been the first time I met him. He was bending over some poor old sick lady who was fainting in the street, and he was rifling her purse. No, I like the kids that way. But Jeffrey taught me class. One look at it, you can see. I need some more lessons. No, really. I can't say no about this guy. He really did teach me that, the performer comes first. Hey, Steve, come on up and jam. What the hell, why not? Life is short, art is long. Here's one guy I'm jamming on. Looks like he'll bug me as soon as I look at him. He doesn't like to be called by his real name, so I just call him a.k.a. Let's have the answer. Humor is his most important prize. Yes, my name is Francis DiMenno. I happen to be the host of this show. It doesn't mean you have to laugh at everything I say. I'm doing well if you laugh at one thing I say. Isn't he humble? Just like Abe Lincoln doing his lessons by firelight, with a little slate and a little piece of burned out twig, adding up 2 and 2, doing his ciphering by a rule of 3. Yeah. Ain't that touching? I am my own worst enemy. People tell me this. They say, Frank, you're your own worst enemy. And I believe them. And that proves it, I guess. Listen, when I was a kid, you know what I used to do? I used to get popsicle sticks. I used to sharpen them against the curb. I used to hold it in my throat and threaten to take my own lunch money. But the joke was on me because I already lost it. Yeah, I'll tell you, my father would come up to me when I was performing some bit of mischief and he'd say, what are you doing? And I'd say, nothing. He did it. Well, it worked, I used to Xerox off the scandal sheet. It used to be about myself. Francis DiMenno is always 15 minutes late, and he drinks all the milk on the coffee supply. Also, he runs up hundreds of copies on the Xerox machine, of which this is one. So now I'm self-employed. I loaf all day, and at 5 o'clock I fire myself, and then I walk away from myself, and I say, you can't fire me because I quit. I draw propaganda leaflets on my own head, urging me to surrender. And I do. Yeah, I call myself on the phone and I say, if you ever want to see yourself alive again, come down to the old warehouse at midnight. And just to spite myself, I don't show up. Well, eventually I trap myself and I say, you intellectual fool, don't you know my great power? Sponging drinks. Yeah, my girlfriend asked me what I'm going to give her for Christmas, and I look at her and I say, how's my little aftershave? Yeah, I tell myself, Frank, you have no sense of humor. And I answer myself, I say, what do you mean? I laughed like hell when Gary Gilmore got shot. I tell myself what I have in culture, and I say, what do you mean? I took myself to the dog track, didn't I? Culture. My girlfriend, she says, Frank, let's have a baby. And I say, shouldn't we get married first? She says, Frank, let's buy a house. Shouldn't I get a job first? No, I'm self-employed. I'm earning my own age, too. It's pretty good. Yep, sometimes I earn up to $40 a week. Yeah, it's all tax-free, which brings me to another topic, which is filling out my tax form. Do you swear that these records are accurate under threat of perjury? And I write, yes. No, you lied. Arrested. Throw him in jail. Throw away the key. Yeah, I take different jobs from time to time because I'm my own worst enemy. I can't really hold a steady job, so, I work at this place called Abby Hoffman's Rock This Store. I didn't last very long, so I got a job at Frank Sinatra's Guns and Ammo. Finally, I graduated to Timothy Leary's Crazy World of LSD. I was a demonstration then, I think. I don't remember. I get drunk and the next morning I'm really hungover and I ask my brain if I can borrow my body. My brain says, no, you took it out last night and you're driving home in a disgraceful condition. Never again. Yeah, everybody else has the MasterCard. I have the slave card. The less you buy, the more you owe. Yeah, other people have the Discovery card. It pays you back. I got the Karma card. It really pays you back. Everybody else buys a high-price spread and I get Brand X. Little package, Brand X, guaranteed 100% impure. I went to a circus once, but it was a communist circus, and there was no ringmaster, just a bunch of clowns. Sort of reminded me of our government. I don't know. You know what I love about this country? You can say anything you want, just as long as you do what you're told. No, I'd never sell my country out, but I haven't got any attractive offers either. No, I never sell my country out to the Russians because if they took over, the fucking money would be worthless. I was in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania a few years back and I saw this record called Andy of Mayberry Screams and Hollers the Blues. What would this be? Long man Floyd Barber, does he knock my girlfriend up? I don't know. You ever hear Marlon Ellison? He wrote a short story called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. When I was working on a sequel, I have no beard and I must shave. I'll do a little song for you. It's called Granny Was a Rolling Stone. Granny was a rolling stone, wherever she laid her half box was her home. I was thinking of the notion of everyday people who somehow gain superpowers. That shows you where my mind is at, It's Super Granny. I'll stop that baby from flying. 3 people and only 1 tea bag? 3 cups of tea from 1 tea bag. How Super Granny? Well, yeah, I feel like Super Granny. You know the difference between a liberal and a libertarian is? Well, one of them is just a whole lot meaner than the other one. And the difference between a socialist and a conservative is a conservative wants all the money for himself. Homeless people. They used to call them bums. Now they call them the homeless. What's worse? I mean, a bum, freewheeling, rides on trains, doesn't work unless he wants to. Homeless people. They have no home. Well, there's a couple of old jokes. They were bum jokes, but now they're homeless people jokes, okay? A homeless person came up to me and said, hey buddy, can I have $1 for a sandwich? And I say, let me see the sandwich first. He says, come on, I haven't had a bite in 3 days. I said, gee, I wish I had your willpower. Well, I gave him $1. He gave a dime to his friend, and he said, that's my agent. Yeah, I hear him outside my door comparing the merits of rubbing alcohol.
It's a good rubbing alcohol. It's not a great rubbing alcohol. My girlfriend's a wino. I'm gonna buy her a bottle of Nuvo Beaujolais. Oh, I ain't got no girlfriend. I said I was gonna take her for a ride. She told me the shopping cart is not a convertible.
Yeah, Bush just vetoed the minimum wage. I'd like to see him work for the minimum wage and give all the people who work for the minimum wage his salary. We'd have a hell of a deficit, but a whole lot more people would be happy at the expense of you-know-who. Doesn't he sort of look like Bob Hogan on wind tunnel joiners? I don't know. He looks like the kind of guy who just shot, he's half happy and half sad. Like he just shot a deer, but he got blood all over his suit. If I were president, the first thing I would do? I'd nationalize salad bars. Also, I'd get a giant fan and push the
greenhouse effect out of the hole in the ozone layer. Oh, right. And I don't want to be president. I want to be the head of Bechtel because you have more power and less responsibility. Well, you know, I only have a minute left, so let's take this minute and discuss Dan's accomplishments. He was on the college bowl, you know, and his team won. But unfortunately, the other team was a rack of Dunkin' Donuts. Well, talk about ending on a big laugh. Well, all right. You know, I have a problem with my religion. I'm a Catholic, and it got to the point where it was interfering with my day-to-day activities. I would come to work reading a communion wine, stating of innocence. I would take 3-hour prayer breaks. So I joined Catholics Anonymous, took the 10-point pledge. We do not believe in the power of the Supreme Being to order our lives. Well, worse came to worse, and, you know, I drifted into the black arts, tarot, I Ching, Satanism. So I went to Wicked Anonymous, and I took the 10-point pledge. We do not believe in the power of a horned devil to cause universal chaos and destruction. And now back where I started.
What do you mean actually?
Back Catholics Anonymous.
What do you mean?
Well, I'd like to bring a first-time guest up here for the first time. Bob Teamer, and he's still there. I letters about the fire frustration. When is this Joker going to finish his drawing?
Good shot, Bob.
You heard?
I've been to all the nights I've seen.
Here he comes. He's just a little slow. Bob looks a little like a guy named David Johnson. Now, you talk about a guy who isn't exactly Ross Hudson, who puts himself in a position where he is a public performer, you know. Dude, I don't want to look at this guy, I don't want to listen to him. Well, David Johnson had a speech impediment, but he wanted to be a DJ more than anything. Well, I'm not saying that this guy is at all similar to Dave Johnson, but it really did strike me, the resemblance. But anyway, we'll let him speak for himself. Here is his Bob Teamer. Oh, don't forget, Others to Be will be arriving very shortly. And, well, I heard their tape. It's pretty slow. You're well advised to stick around. But here's Bob. Real quick, tell them to join their other fine songs from their fourth song down on tape, and all of your college radio station comments for yourself. One of the first rules of comedy is not to go over your time limit, so in the 10 minutes that I have, no, just kidding, Chris. Well, we've delayed this band, and they went over their sound check. They don't like having people watch them, so you guys ought to clear the room because like the show is like over. But Keith Reardon and his Band of Color, or we should just call them the Band of Color, will be here next week as our future act. And well, let me say something about Border Patrol. A fine band, a band that I never tire of watching. Not only do you get them, but you also get Los Tres. Border Patrol will be performing, I believe, second. Los Tres will be the opening act. And all that starts at 9 o'clock. Thank you for coming to the open mic. I'm getting out of here. And guys, I love it. Thank you. Thanks to Letters to Be. Is there any applause left in any of us? Join us next week for the Band of Color.
is the Cafe Cabaret, and before we introduce our next guest, who's John, who's going to favor us with some this. It's not on now, he told me. I thought maybe I just warm up here, or warm the room up. I mean, not like there's any calling involved, we didn't tear my throat apart if I don't think there's anything or anything, but, well, there it is. You know, this uprising in Beijing, it sort of brings new life to the old Johnny Rivers classic. Secret Asian man. Okay, that you would know, and I'll take you way more days. Well, you know what the Chinese call butch? Man whose head looks like dead incandescent bulb. So you can tell they have a lot of respect for him. You know, countries are coming back now, and there's one. All our old favorites, you know, both like the Japanese guys, they found a whole new audience. Not that they haven't been finding a whole new audience every 20 years for their second generation children, and then they're doing that one. Of course, they're reminded of these smart, Alec, wise-cracking, Warner Brothers cartoons of 40s. Imbued with depression mentality, some people have seen a COVID war fervor. But anyway, instead of Porky Pig, we should have more of the Sibians type of laws. He could be called Porky Swine. And, well, he would also stutter. And so, Benedict Sweetheart, Petunia Swine, would be trapped in a tunnel of blood. Porky, it's dark. You want to crash? Just come for me. I want you to hold it tighter. And so Porky says, do you want to flashlight? Oh, I love that joke there. I was reading a prospectus to the commuter rail, and it says, no Netflix have special needs assistance animals. Special needs assistance animals. What happened to seeing eye dogs? I mean, a special needs assistant animal could be anything. You see some old trunk with a St. Bernard. Get that dog off the train. That there dog is careful my special medicine, that little barrel. He's my special needs assistance dog. Well, I mean, special needs assistance animals can turn anything, so why not a talking beat parrot for use, right? This would come especially handy when you're stopped in traffic or something like that. All right, buddy, what do you mean by making that new turn? Yeah, that'd be very helpful. Going from manic nature, I'm just shivering, my eyes and I have a confession to make. I did smoke some crack, and I smoke crack all the time. But my secret is, I know the hell. Well, anyway. Dyslexics. Look up all the correct incorrect spellings, all the words you misspelled because you're dyslexic. They're all new words the same thing. Dyslexic on. D-A-W-G, K-A-T, and all your favorite. Dyslexic. That was laugh with lovely on the last race. I'm smoking on the sack of Paul all the way right. Everything is, King Midas, right? Everything he touches turns to gold. What about King Midas' dog? Every dog he touches turns to a golden retriever. At least I'm happy. Fine. Alright, what's the difference between pornography and religion? There is none. Think about it. What is pornography for? What are all these poor people go to these little booths and drop quarters to watch off cliffs? What are they really after? They can't do it themselves, they hire someone else out to do it for them. And it's the same thing with religion. I can't find religion, so I'll listen to this gibbering priest and his concatenation, nonsensical verbiage. Yeah, that'll teach you the true one way. That's why I love religion. We wouldn't be there today if Noah were a temperamental artist, like presumably myself. He said, 7 of every unclean animal and 2 of every clean animal the other way around. But once he gets on the ship,
Oh, this is dreadful. It simply will not do. Froze, filthy animal report. Poison fish.
there's a place to sleep.
Silver. Mister, feel sorry for yourself, why don't you? You're a legend in your own mind. You're a fucker, a skulker, an unshaven shark, a vicious murderer, and tired of an alien smuggler dog. All the angels meet in the largest craters in all of heaven, and all the devils fry, and all the deepest holes in hell. Just to watch you.
Well, anyway, I am a person. Here's a man who is going to teach us the meaning of the word art. What is the meaning of the word art? Well, anyway, why do you want to come to these idiotic introductions for people they barely know? But anyway, here it is, John.
New performer.
I don't know. This is only a systems check here. Wait for his check. Systems check. Systems check.
Waiting for Franny.
Waiting for.
By Jean-Paul Sartre.
I thought this was Buddy Holly.
Is this the?
Those tom-toms, they're driving me mad. Do something about them. Call them toms. And then they'll only drive me half insane. I can't stand it. Those inferior, weak beings who I've enslaved and conquered are coming to destroy me. They're coming closer. It's working. They're going away. They can't stand my insane ranting. It hurts their ears. I'm saved. Free to enslave the next island. Eugene O'Neill. And the Emperor Basketball Jones. He's probably basketball. Get it? No. Well, he's not supposed to. Alright, I guess it's time to introduce our next guests. Some friendly folks coming from Oregon. Got tired of all that fresh air and sunshine and bleed and all that other stuff. And it's time to come to this filthy, dirty, rotten, corrupt sewer, formerly the revolutionary capital of the United Colonies. Now, crusted over with 150 years of dead, feet-brow tradition. But it's a new day. It's 1989, which in Roman numerals is CIC. No, it's MIM. You ever think of that? Is it MIM? Oh, MDM, right? That's 1900. Yes, MIM. No, it's MXIM. Okay, I found it.
MCM.
Yes, right. MCM is 1900, MXIM is 9 minus 2000. Or you could say it's MDM, C, XXXB, no, IX. There. That's the other way of saying it. But we're being needlessly complicated. These two folks are in a band, the name of which I've already forgotten. Like the rain hits, the wet pavement in the summertime.
MCL.
Too bad. Just too bad. So I don't allow them to come here to introduce themselves. This is Dan. Let's hope it's not Dan Tom's death, the famous play. No, I like the kid Dan, even though I barely know him, and he probably hates me now. But, yeah, really. Join the club. Oh, great. Yeah, I said that once. Someone said, do you hate everybody? So I was working as a cashier at a village food store down the street, and I sort of wore a perpetual scowl on my face, and I said to them, no, it's because of a lost girlfriend who I'm so unhappy. And they said, oh, it's been 3 years. Haven't you gone over it yet? No. Probably not. Anyway, here's the end. Oh, it's okay. It's enough. That was great. We're gonna have a big We Are the World style finale at the end. Today is the solstice, which is the longest day. Yeah.
feels wrong.
Sure, it's nice.
Yeah, because I feel you, I guess it would be, wouldn't it? Would they? Wow, quid pro quo. Brilliant deduction there, Sherlock. That is cool. Alright, this is an ad for, well, I'll let you know what it is. Say, ever ask yourself how many chimps it would take to type the complete works of Shakespeare?
Well, microchip has the answer. You can have the complete works of Shakespeare typed by chimpanzee for one incredibly low price, as opposed to 2 or 3 incredibly low prices offered elsewhere. That's right. All the works of Shakespeare combined, typed by chimp. How do we do it? No overhead. That's right. The chimps swing from the rafters. No overhead. You get all these hits and more. Hamlet, to be or not to be, or to swing from a tree. That is the question. Get thee to a petting zoo, Ophelia. There are more things in heaven and earth that are dreamed of in your philosophy, Bonzo. Now, that microchip supply you with all the chip-type classics you always hankered after, but could never afford before the advent of chip-friendly computers. Microchip, order now. The first 10,000 words are free. And yeah, that big Batman movie is coming out on Friday. I like to try to be topical from time to time. Pretty soon the ad industry is going to get on it. We'll have a movie called Bacardi Batman, his drunken assistant, Rob Roy. Waging a war against sober drivers, judges, sailors, boiled owls, ship captains, state police, and others with a blood alcohol content below 0.10. Robin. We're trapped, Bacardi Batman.
Oh, it appears as though we are.
Yes, we're trapped. Due to the drunkenness of the writers, we're trapped in this movie, which makes no sense because everybody in it is drunk. And all the humor is based on humorous mispronunciations of words that drunks, according to the prevailing folklore, aren't able to pronounce. And so they overcompensate by enunciating incredibly clearly. But real drunks know that they're really filthy, loaded.
You're not Rob Roy, you're a spy.
I can imagine that. Oh, remember the restaurant being drunk? What do you mean, old friend?
You're a liar.
It's Super Supervisor. He sees through walls. He has the magical ability to tell if you've taken 1 minute more than your lunch break. Super Supervisor. Yes. I'm just going to throw out a whole bunch of stuff like little synapses slowly popping out of my brain and fizzing to their inevitable decline. Powdered DNA. God eats them. Why don't you? Mad scientist, is your monster not frightening anybody? Take him to the Frankenstein School of Elocution. Go from this to this. At the Frankenstein School of Elocution. Say, is your Frankenstein listless and moping around the house? Well, he needs a treat. He deserves a treat. And here's what you get him. You get him We Belong Dead mix. Frankenstein asks for it by name. Yeah, drugs in the workplace. This could be a real problem to productivity. If drugs in the workplace were as prevalent as our leaders would lead us to believe they are, then you'd see ads like this. No, actually, people, you call it warehouse on the telephone. Hello? Is this the buy right, cut rate warehouse? Yeah. Well, until what time are you open? I hear you're having a big sale.
Yeah, our prices are always the same. In fact, we just as soon as should not come down just now because we're busy playing poker, watching television with the sound grossed up. We don't want you coming in and interrupting the test pattern. You could go somewhere else. They have better sales than we do anyway. We just don't want to be bothered. In fact, we have a special prize. If you're the first person not to come in, you win exactly what you deserve. Nothing. No. Alright. It's Canada's best kept secret. It's Canada's only secret. Cold-sickles. When kids in Canada want a treat, what do they clamor and bug their moms for? Cold-sickles. The frozen woolly mammoth treat. You can make them for pennies per rainy afternoon in your own basement or igloo. Cold-sickles. Or how's this? Come to Einstein Place. Einstein Place, where all the smart people live. Energy equals matter times the speed of light squared at Einstein Place. Or if you don't want that, relax. Come to yoga court. Nobody does anything except meditate. Yoga Court. Here's an impression. Moody Moodpecker. I went to an amusement park that was kind of a cheap and dingy amusement park. They didn't have a tunnel of love, they had a tunnel of passion was broken. How depressing. You know, every clown's heart is breaking for one reason or another. This is a known fact. So, I guess that presumably that would mean that clowns would have to have organ transplants. But what fun there would be in the operating room. An exploding Jarvik 7, a poo-poo lung, and the doctor would report. They bring the clown in on a unicycle, he'd be dead on arrival because it taken like 20 years to get him. Kids like candy, you know. In fact, they like it so much it's almost like an addictive drug to them, if in fact it is. Yes, kids love candy. When they've had too much candy, feed them pep loss. Pep loss, it turns the crabbies into the browsies. Browsies, the prevailing blandness of American culture, will be marketed. It itself, turning in on itself. Ultra bland, tastes like nothing. And at a cost you can afford, free, because there's nothing there. Or, I don't know, these right-wing survivalist groups kind of frighten me. And pretty soon they're going to open up little stores and shopping malls and have like these obnoxious blaring ads on the radio, which I'm so good at replicating the obnoxiousness of. Anyway, go to the bigotry. Inflame the prejudices of bigots from years 8 to 80 with Little Bigot coloring books, Hate Nanny records, Hate Mongers, a delicious candy-colored treat available for a limited time. Get yours in a 5-pound box before all the greedy corners come and scoff the lot at the bigotry. At the Ku Klux Klan shopping plaza, right off Route 6 in Kokomo, Indiana. They're going to replace Santa, you know. He's going to look more like what's his name? Michael Johnson, the guy from Miami Vice. So if you combine that with a Charles Atlas type of ad, you know. I'd go out with a Santa Claus if it weren't for that enormous belly of his. It quivers like a bowl full of jelly whenever he laughs. Gosh darn it, I'm tired of being the fattest Santa Claus on the beach. I'm gonna risk 5 cents and send a stamp to Joe Hercules. He'll help me shed that gosh darn ugly flab in seconds. 1 week later, oh Santa, you're a new man. Thanks to Joe Hercules. Page 7. Well, I'll tell you, I haven't had so much fun since the House of X burned down down the street. And I was in. You've heard the expression, spare the God and spoil the child? Well, for your child, get nothing but the best. God, accept no other. Our gods are toasted for extra purity. 100% Savior, 3 times more powerful than the next popular brand. Costs a little more, but worth it. Ask for it by name, God. And finally, a special toy for your children. A special toy. It's a living midget. When they ask you for their Christmas time treat, get them My Little Man. My Little Man. This midget caters to your every whim. And it caters to their every thoughtless, selfish little piece of mischief they want to commit. Also, My Little Manor, sold separately, and My Little Maid, sold pending legislation. Well, geez, you know, I never thought I'd hear myself say these words, but it's time for all of us to get up on stage now, believe it or not. Yeah, I'm not joshing. I mean, you know, this is how I make my living, right? By joking. Come on. Bring your axes. Let's have one big jamboree. You don't have to twist your arms too much. You're all performers out here anyway.
But they all need an audience, Francis.
I'll be the audience. Everybody else.
We want to hear you up there.
Be our mirror.
Keys and keys. Now, they need the bass player.
Now we gotta think of something we all know.
Then we have one amplifier.
Does your chewing gum lose its flavor on the bedpost overnight? Or I can say Christmas carols or serving patriotic songs.
How about Jingle Bell Rock, Francis?
Okay, right, completely spontaneous. Sure, come on, it's a big We Are the World spectacular. Do we need a theme? Just a key. Well, we can use, we can color code the theme to the key. So what key should we be in? I didn't bring my harmonica, gosh darn it. Now I can't snap on blues.
D flat.
D flat. No, D flat.
It's where you talk, Francis.
Is that the way I talk?
Yeah.
Really? Let's throw the piano on the floor and see what key that's in.
That's gonna take a while to
All done with that anyway. All right. Let's talk about our garden of earthly delights, but since this is the most hellishly hot day of the year, also the longest, most hellish day of the year, I guess we should just call it something. Garden of hellish delights. No offense.
We'll keep it in two.
Keep it in tune. We ask the Osiris blessings. We ask the Pythagoras blessings. We ask the Heraclitus blessings. We ask the Socrates blessings. We ask the Darwin blessings. We ask the Einstein blessings. Hey there, Al, where'd you get that haircut? We ask the Thurston Howell III and Lovey bless us. And most of all, we ask that baby Huey blesses us. What? Baby Huey? Yeah, Huey Newton, as an infant. Come on. Give it up. Huey Newton. Duck-flavored fig Newtons. Huey Newtons.
That's pretty good. Yeah.